Thanks very much for checking out my YouTube videos. I do greatly appreciate it. I thought I'd put together a quick little update here using the studio feature on YouTube. They're live. Essentially, it's the easiest, simplest way for me to go ahead and record a quick video without it being a series of edits and chasing my tail around with a script and all that crazy stuff. So essentially what we're doing is just giving a quick little update on what I've been doing with Turo. These are by no means fancy super videos. So if your level of expectation is special effects and crazy edits and things along that line, that's not really what it is. Essentially, I've been trying to put these together to be able to develop a podcast, a series of maybe 6 or 12 individual podcasts discussing Turo in the Canadian market. I thought I would run Turo for a little while, get a feel for it, and kind of go from there. So I've put a vehicle up on listing. So I have a 2014 Outlander. I did have a 2014 Chevy Cruze as well. That came in the second month. I then sold the Cruze mainly because I wasn't getting a lot of action on Turo. And by the time I factored in the insurance costs on that particular vehicle, the payout or the ROI on it would be 2 to 3 years, essentially. It was just, the insurance was crazy. So it was one of those things where I looked at that and went, okay, overhead costs and things along that line. It wasn't worth running that particular model on Turo, and I don't think it was very competitive in that particular marketplace, because I think if you're looking at a four-door sedan that's a midsize or a compact, your price point doesn't really spread exponentially based on year or packages. So if you're looking at a $50 rental, well, a $50 will get you a 2019 or a 2021, a newer car. Whereas if you look at a 2014 in that particular marketplace, as far as that particular car is concerned, it would have to rent out for $50 to $40 to be able to pay out the insurance costs and to cover the maintenance. Now, the depreciation factor would be different, right? So in other words, if you had a 2021 Cruze, you'd have to be writing that down every year. Whereas a 2014, you are writing it down, but it's substantially less. We're talking maybe 6%. Right? Whereas the other one, you're probably looking at 10 to 12%. So again, it's one of those things where, yes, you could kind of nitpick and go, yeah, it's probably worth doing. Now, if I had that Cruze as an exclusive second vehicle or a primary vehicle in the GTA, I would probably keep renting it, mainly because I think in that area, I'm out in kind of a rural community, about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Kitchener-Waterloo. That particular vehicle isn't a hot button here. Whereas I think if it was in a city central, I think someone would probably go, I need to go get groceries, or I'm going for a runabout, good fuel mileage, sitting idle in traffic, that type of thing. Comfortable car for that, right? Whereas up here, my Outlander seems to do better, mainly because it's a V6, so pretty good power to it. It's not a sports car or anything along that line. All-wheel drive, and it's an automated all-wheel drive system that gives you good fuel mileage, so it kicks in and out as required, which is pretty decent for up in this neck of the woods. And the argument I've had from a few other clients is it's not a minivan, and it does 7 passengers, and it does 7 passengers quite comfortably if you've got kids that are under 5 feet or 5'5". In that third row, they're very comfortable. Lots of room in that from that standpoint. The mid section is seating for 3, and full adults can sit there. Lots of room. So again, it's one of those things where you look at, is it an Escalade? Is it a Navigator? No, it's still kind of a bit of a compact in the SUV world, right? So it's bigger than a Santa Fe, bigger than a lot of little compacts, but it's one of those things where you kind of look, you kind of go, if I need to make a trip from Kitchener, Guelph, or that area, and I wanted to take a week to go north, I would probably want to take my vehicle. Plus, my rate is enticing, I guess is the word. So I use automated pricing with it. I use Turo's features there because I figured, you know what? If I were starting out, which I am, I don't know the market that well. I'm going to want to have Turo basically set prices and do the bookings, right? In other words, hands off. I also do a point-to-point keyless drop off and pickup. So in other words, it's almost automated. So other than having to wash the vehicle, print out the paperwork, schedule the car, and do things along that line, it's actually pretty hands off. So again, if you're out there thinking about doing Turo, how you approach the business is kind of the key thing as to whether or not you want to continue to do it. I think if you're putting tons of hours into it and trying to recoup the cost of your car by going out and advertising on Kijiji or doing personal ads, that type of stuff, I think you'd slowly go mad. Whereas I think you need to just say to yourself, you know what, I'm going to just rely on Turo for bookings, and it is what it is. They take 25 points, and just roll with it as it's not really a business. It's more of a little sideline. And that's the way I've looked at it from my point of view, as far as that's concerned. You have to be able to write off a few things. Like, for instance, I've had a couple little dings and marks and scratches on the car where if they're under a certain value, it's not really worth putting a claim into Turo. I've had one person where they've damaged the side skirt, which is a couple plastic clips, and maybe an hour and a half worth of work of fidgeting to get it right. So no big deal. I've had one person back into the rear bumper, and they're a polyurethane bumper. So on the Outlander, it's nice if you take as long as the paint hasn't been marred or scratched, if you take a hot gun and you pull the bumper back and you put a little bit of heat behind it, traditionally you can massage it back out and it'll be fine, right? So little irritable things. I've had folks who've had a couple of kids and they've spilled a few things in there. We're going to call it spill, right? So again, things you have to kind of acknowledge and say to yourself, if you're going to go do a Turo rental, a peer-to-peer type deal with your car, you're going to have to expect that. And you're going to have to say to yourself, it's a car that you love, and you put a lot of time and energy into it, or you spent a lot of money on it, and it's going to get yourself a $50 or $100 rental rate per day. Maybe it's not worth doing, like drive you crazy. But if you've got, in my mind, I've kind of paralleled it with a lot of the YouTubers down in the States where they kind of go, it's a bread and butter car. It's a daily. It's nothing to really be overprotective of. So again, it's one of those things where when I went and bought my Outlander, that was the outline. My mind was to buy something that served the purpose but wasn't show quality. In other words, it already had a couple little marks on it, already had a couple little scratches. Interior was nice and clean. So if you're sitting there and you're comfortable and you're going running the kids to a water park or the local mall, or you're going for a run up to Owen Sound, to come back and you've got a chip in the hood, or you've got a little mark in the door, like a little stuff. It's nice to be able to deal with somebody like me who'll basically say, you know what, I'm not gonna rake you over the coals over it. Clearly, it's just things that happen. So it's one of those things where that's where I wanted that particular vehicle for. Now the Outlander I like because it's a 6-speed, traditional old school style transmission, which means they're essentially bulletproof. I worked at Mitsubishi for a few years, service desk, back shop, front end, even did sales, finance, that type of stuff. So got a chance to see the overview of what the vehicles were like. The Outlander GT is a different vehicle over the regular Outlander. And that's most people kind of don't even realize that it's not a CVT transmission. The V6 is the V6 that's been in their line for years, so it's bulletproof. There really is very little that can go wrong with that engine. The only drawback to it is a timing belt. If it was a timing chain, it would almost be the perfect vehicle, right? So it would require very little maintenance. So that's why I picked it up. Front end, I think they stole a lot of components for the V6 off their truck line in the UK and in Japan. So I think they basically hit the parts bin to kind of upgrade a little bit. So is it heavy duty? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you look at the SE or the base models of that particular vehicle, you look at tie rods and ball joints and things along that line, they're just a little smaller. Where you look to GT, the parts were just a little heavier. Costs were almost the same. So it's one of those things it's not where they're going to nail you and say, oh, you got the GT package, you got special brakes. No, it's off the shelf stuff, right? So it's nice in that regards for regular maintenance and service. And at the time when I priced out insurance, it was cheaper than a Toyota or a Honda. Theft rates on these particular units are really low. There's a good support for aftermarket components, which means that if I had to get a bumper, I could go get an aftermarket bumper pretty easy. I'm not tied to the dealer or proprietary pricing to do service work. Same thing with a taillight lens or a headlight bulb. It's all stuff you can get off the shelf, which makes the vehicle almost fleetable from that standpoint. So that kind of gives you a little update on where I'm at. So we're at about that 5th month point. So we're coming up to some requirements. Turo sent me a notice that I need to go get a inspection done for the 6-month turnover. So um, I find that a little annoying because the timing as far as when I went on to Turo and when the inspection is due, and there's no gray area there. They pretty much say, this is the time we stop you scheduling. We're not going to book you anymore unless you get this done. That's irritating. The kilometers on my vehicle are fairly low in comparison to when the safety was done. So yeah, 6 months has passed, but I bought the vehicle, I think, with 48,000, 47,000 K on it. And it's now at about 55, 54. So we're almost close to that first oil change, essentially. So in my mind, I was going to do the summer tires, switch them back, and I was going to do the oil change and do a general maintenance package. And that would go into a local shop because that's stuff that if I'm going to do an inspection, I've got to pay for that. I might as well get an oil change while I'm there. I might as well do the tires, right? So, and it gives them a chance to take the tires off and check the brakes and go to town on it and basically give me a report, right? So I figured that would be March, first week in March, maybe second week. That's kind of the time when you start to look at doing tire changeover, subject to the weather, right? So it leaves me with a little conundrum. Do I go in and pay to get an inspection done without an oil change and without a tire change up? Or do I wait a month and say, okay, I'm going to take that vehicle now off the road and just basically drive it, as a personal vehicle for 3 to 4 weeks, and then roll that cost into the service as far as that's concerned. And it's one of those things where I'm not expecting anything to come back on the report. I'm just anticipating the fact that I got to lay out 80 or 90 bucks, and maybe I'm just being old and cheap. Maybe that's what it is. So I'll probably break down. I will probably go get an inspection done. Like, that's the nature of it. But it's one of those things that I look at Turo and I think to myself, you don't really know the Canadian market or the region. So that's annoying. You said, hey, you know what? Vehicle inspections, we do them on the intervals for tire changes. Snow tires are mandatory. Like, that would make sense. You say, okay, so you're going out every 6 months, switching out tires. Well, you get the tires off. We want a brake report. We want a condition report on the vehicle. That would be ideal. Now they picked a middle of winter, just an annoyance, right? It's just one of those things you look at, you kind of go, if you sent a questionnaire out, and this is for Turo directly, and I'm watching all the other YouTubers have a little conniption fit about it too. It's one of those things where you get a 5-star rating for service now and maintenance and things along that line, which I kind of get. You want to have a little bit of a guidance, or you want to be able to say, hey, if you don't do this, this is the result, right? So I understand that. There's the carrot, there's the whip, right? So which one do you want to go with, right? If you sent out a general questionnaire and said, when is the best time? We need to do these yearly, or we need to do these every 6 months, which I think every year is probably the more realistic thing to do. It's the same thing with every other fleet vehicle out there. So every year a fleet has to go out and get a yellow sticker, a little stamp, and get her done, right? If you just said, hey, we parallel the fleet programs that are in Southern Ontario and across Canada. Once a year, you have to go in and we're going to check the brakes, the tires, and make sure everything's okay. That would make sense, right? But they don't. They've just arbitrarily picked a month at random. So annoying from that standpoint. So that's one of those things that I just find irritating. And again, it would be great if there was a Turo operator out there that was perhaps more technologically involved, perhaps someone who was out there that said, you know what, I'd love to do a parallel company, but they don't have a competitor to be able to say, hey, here's the benchmark in the industry. They're kind of setting it, right? They're the trailblazers, it is what it is, right? So that's me ranting. So, and the other one is, let's take a look. So I got a notice about preparing the vehicle. So let's just talk about that. So they've changed up their 5-star maintenance rating program. Basically, they're sending out a questionnaire for renters to basically review your vehicle. The problem that I have with that, right off the bat, everyone that I've rented to has basically been a tourist coming into Canada, and they want a week or a 2-week rental at a cheap rate. And that's where my vehicle kind of falls in there. And they want to have room to be able to throw some gear in, do some shopping, go cross-border. I'm pretty liberal when it comes to licensing. I'm okay if you've got an international driver's license. Apparently some of the other Turo operators have issues with that. Apparently, some of the other car rental agencies in Ontario have issues with that. I don't, as long as Turo sends me back a response that says, yes, the driver's license has been approved and it's authorized. I'm okay with that because insurance covers it, so it's fine. It'd be like someone coming in from Quebec or Alberta. It is what it is, right? I'm okay from that standpoint. Plus, most of them are mature. Everyone I've been renting to has been over 30, so it's one of those things you look, you kind of go, clearly they're mature enough to understand the value of a vehicle, and everyone seems to be pretty decent as far as that's concerned. They just don't want headaches. But they send out this little review where they kind of give you a questionnaire, and they don't give me a copy of the questionnaire. They just give you a little spiel on it as far as what they want and so forth, and how they're getting the responses. My understanding is it's just like a 1 to 5 rating, right? So, and some of the responses I've gotten from folks that have been out there that have rented my vehicle, they're not mechanics. And in fact, if anything, they're worse. So my second rental was out to a guy who complained about the brakes. Now he rented it. I was at I think 48,600 and change when I got the safety. So he rented it at 40. It was like 800 kilometers after safety, right? So, and we're talking like a couple weeks, like if that. And my mechanic, well, not my mechanic, but an independent shop had already gone through this particular vehicle prior to me buying it. And it was an independent shop that I don't deal with. I managed to get the seller to do the safety for me, right? I said, well, this is the price I'm prepared to pay. Go get it done, right? So, and the technician knew that. So there was really no favors given. It was kind of like, this is what it is. I'm buying it. If it's a headache, I'm coming back. So he rated the brakes at like 90%, and the rotors were clean. They had to get machined, but they were clean. They were decent, right? Tires are decent, no play, nothing in anything, nice and tidy, right? So I get a complaint that the brakes are bad. And I'm looking at kind of going, there's no quantitative statement there. It's just a rating. So it's like, well, did they grind? Did they squeal? No, they just didn't perform the way he felt that particular vehicle should perform. Not comparison to what he drives. Well, what you drive, it's like a small compact car. When you're in a 7-passenger SUV with an excessive amount of weight to it, it's not going to brake the same. It's not going to drive the same. And that's my problem with their rating system. It's not a qualified opinion. Now, if you came back and said, hey, Keith, you know what? The ashtray was dirty. Or you came back and said, hey, there was a smell to the car. Yeah, okay, well, I can go whiff it. I can look at it. It is what it is. But when you're looking at, please diagnose this person's car, and you have no background or experience, and then you reflect in the rating system on it, I have a problem with that. That's just an issue as far as that's concerned. So it's one of those things where if another company came out that paralleled Turo, and they said, well, these are it, as far as that's concerned, I would probably give them I would probably try a second party, or I'd try another company. Just pointing it out as far as that's concerned. And Turo has got a massive spread as far as I'm concerned. They're in the US, they're in Canada. You would think at some point they would sit back and go, well, this is the region that we're in. It's not California. Like if I were in California or Florida, I'd go, yeah, you know what? January, February, fine. Take it in for a vehicle inspection, no problem. But in Southern Ontario, we're at minus 23. Right? I've got snow tires on. I'm not ripping anything apart on that vehicle right now. Like that's just the nature of it. I had a complaint about the windshield. And then I talked to the guy. He said, well, the wipers weren't clearing properly. And again, this is this minus 23. The windshield's frozen. And he hops into the vehicle and just cranks them on. He goes, well, they didn't clear the windshield, so they're not good wipers. The windshield's frozen. You have to let the vehicle idle for a little while, warm the windshield up, and then you can go ahead and do that. Or you have to get it with an ice scraper and scrape it. Like that's how it works. And of course, the gentleman is coming in, and he is from South America. So welcome to Canada. This is what winter is. You have to clear the snow yourself, or you have to scrape the ice. So he sent a marker in there for maintenance. Wipers aren't good. And it's like a perfect example where lack of communication from the Turo end of it is annoying. In other words, if they rate you on something, you should be able to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, what was the logic behind that? Because I do. I'll send an email out or give them a call and say, hey, you rated that as a problem. What was the issue? It's like, well, the wipers weren't great. It's minus 23. Did you let the window warm up? No. Right? Did you go out and scrape it with the ice scraper, which I include? Right. Again, these are just little things that you kind of go, the rating system doesn't really rate properly. So learning curve, I guess. So let's get back to what I've been up to. So insurance, we finally got a resolution to that. So we've got my old policy and my new policy. So, and again, the insurance company that I deal with, the broker, did explain to me that I would be expecting a sizable jump in my rates. So I also went out and did a little shopping to compare. So my Outlander is almost doubled as far as the insurance cost is concerned, which kind of puts it into question as to whether it's worth remaining on Turo, or remaining on Turo with the current rates that are set. So it's one of those things where, do I need to add an extra $10 to offset, or an extra $20 on my rental rates to offset the cost of insurance on that vehicle now? Because Economical, which is the company that I'm dealing with, because Economical is a company that Turo insures with. So I thought, well, I'll parallel. So I'll go, there's no real issues there. You kind of go, well, I'm with Economical, you're with Economical. If there's anything that's in the gray area, it should overlap anyways, right? So I wouldn't have any issues when it comes to claims or hurdles or, records as far as insurance claims are concerned. So my research has basically told me that my logic was flawed, that I could basically insure with any insurance company, and I don't think Economical really caters either way. It's one of those things you look at, you kind of go, not really. At least from the broker I'm dealing with, it's kind of, they didn't even want to deal with it. So it's one of those things where that's a problem. If you're on Turo, you think to yourself, I'm going to switch out of my current policy into an Economical policy, which would make sense, so that you can see that one is insured through the other. There's an easy way of verification. Not really. So it doesn't really work that way. So just be aware of that. So I decided to go and do a little shopping. So I went to my bank, and I'm not going to name banks or places or things like that line. I'm just going to say, hey, generic stuff. I figured, okay, as a bank client, because I haven't really changed insurance in 10 years, what could they offer? They provide a couple services and some discounts. So they priced out my Outlander for actually a little more coverage than what I would get through Economical. So they were going to include their roadside assistance program, which is basically a CAA membership attached to the vehicle, which I talked to about in another vehicle, about how CAA is attached to me, not to the vehicle. So in other words, it doesn't really help anybody that's in the vehicle that's using it or borrowing it. So I thought that was a little weird, but it is what it is on that. So there's no way of getting around it. So getting it built into the insurance coverage as it being attached to that vehicle makes sense. And by the time they put that in, which I don't get with Economical, it was almost the same price point as my new price. The other ones that they were prepared to give me a discount if I paid the full year up front. So in other words, they said, well, they've knocked 3% off if I just went ahead and, paid it. It's a no carrying charge. So I thought that was kind of a nice little bonus. So that's $30 or $40 saved, right? Like, these are little incremental things you got to look at if you're running one vehicle, because your overhead really does seem to cover a good portion. I did some numbers earlier, so you may want to check out some of the other videos where you kind of go, if you're renting it out for $50 and your insurance cost is this per month, and if it's this, and then depreciation and maintenance, and by the time you factor all that in, really you're not making a ton of money. It's like a 10% return. So just be aware of that when you're out there shopping for a vehicle or you're doing anything along that line. This is not a turnkey, good news, I can quit my job kind of side hustle. It's a side hustle where you kind of go, well, I have to give up my vehicle for 10 to 20 days out of the month, which if it's the second vehicle, maybe that's doable. I have to look at the fact that it covers my insurance. So it does. So that's kind of nice. So my insurance is paid for. Does it cover my maintenance? Yes, it does. Does it cover some of the time that I have to put into it? Doing up paperwork, documentation, washing the vehicle, doing inspections, taking photos? It doesn't. So just so you're aware of that. So if you're thinking, okay, will that factor out to a $25 an hour return on the work I put into it? I don't think it does. So second vehicle, because the workload is distributed over the two, probably you're looking at a little more money. So it's one of those things where if you progressively move forward, you're probably looking at it just builds up. So if you're running a little fleet, you're probably going to do okay. But it's one of those things off the one off. It's more of a hobby than a business. It's more of a very mild, soft hustle. Now, if I were in the Toronto or the GTA area and I had a vehicle that was sitting in a car park or underground parking for like 80% of the time, this is probably not a bad option as far as that's concerned, because you're probably in an apartment complex. You're probably going to get more people in that general area that need a vehicle for a daily or for a runabout. So you'd probably have a little more of an offset for control. Out in my little rural area, I seem to be getting more of I need it for the week. So I'm losing it for 7 to 10 to 12 days in a row. So there isn't that return time. So, which is fine. I've got another car. So it's not a big deal from that standpoint. But just something to kind of factor in. So with the doubling of my insurance on my Outlander, I'm going to switch brokers. So I've already picked another broker, a local one. I don't get a price advantage by switching to a local independent. I don't lose anything as far as that's concerned. I'm probably going to be looking at a rate increase next year. It's just the nature of it. I asked her blatantly, just what is the profit on something like this? Like, what is your take on what I'm putting together? And she said it's been about 20%, right, as far as what the company kind of kicks back. So really, if I'm spending, let's call it $1,000, and I'm not saying it's $1,000, I'm just using it as a number. So they get $200, right? So really, the insurance itself is $8. Then you got to figure, okay, the insurance company's got to make some profit too. So then there's payouts, right? So a 20% markup in a business is pretty normal, right, as far as that's concerned. When I went and did the competitive pricing through my bank and a couple other brokers, the hurdle that I had was I have an older Jag that I like. I don't put a lot of kilometers on it. I think I bought it with 75,000 K. I've got 81, I think, on it, maybe 80 K on it. So I've had it for 2.5 years. So I do like 2,000 kilometers a year on it. Like, I don't really drive it. I just like it. It's one of those bizarre little cars, right? So I bought it during COVID. So the car prices were crazy. I thought, if I'm going to pay a crazy price for a car, it's the same price as a Corolla. I can't buy a Corolla for that price point with that kilometers on it, crazy as that sounds. So I bought that because timing chain, standard geared transmission, pretty easy to maintain and service. So I like it for that, and it's got a little style to it, and the leather is nice. So it's not a flashy car by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not saying, hey, it's a Jaguar, look at this. I'm just saying it's, at the time, that was a good value for what it represented. I like the look and I like the drive of the car, and it's all-wheel drive. So it's great for this neck of the woods. It's not suitable for Turo because it's a 2004, so it's too old, right? Which is interesting because now the insurance companies that I'm shopping with, Economical is really the only one that kind of caters to older cars without being a huge hurdle. So, which I thought was strange. So I've always had older cars. It's just the nature of it. Like, I find value in them, and I find some of the older models you can pick up are fairly nice and decent shape. And it's one of those things where it's either the previous owners maintained the living daylights out of it. Usually it's a retiree, and it's their car for traveling, right? And they don't put a lot of kilometers on it. It's just nice, right? So, but with that said, if I switched over insurance, I would have a hurdle getting an additional policy on that car. I have to go to a specialty company to get it insured like it was a classic or a specialty car. And I'm going, well, it's not a classic. It's not a specialty car. It's a Ford Fusion underneath. It's nothing amazing. It is what it is. So that's where it's kind of a clincher where I need to stay with Economical now anyways because of that. And the odd part is the price point on my older car is actually the same as it was before. So really, it hasn't seen a hike jump. So it's one of those things you look, you kind of, okay, it is what it is. But it's one of those things you look at, you kind of go, I've got no control in that industry. I can't really say, let's open up an insurance company. So it's one of those things I just have to lump it. So what am I saying? I found a new insurance broker. We're going with an independent. So somebody I can actually walk through the door and talk to. Call center at the place where I'm at now is horrible. They don't have properly educated staff. I don't think they say they monitor the calls, so maybe management is clueless too. The customer service is horrible on top of it. So not only are you paying a premium for a product, or I was, but you're not getting a premium service out of it. And it's almost like they've stripped it right down to the point where, as embarrassing as it sounds, any insurance inquiries were almost verbatim on what my chat GTP would respond to. So I'm almost certain they're sitting there going, hey, AI, I got a guy on the phone. How much is this? What should we do? Like, I'm almost certain that's what was happening, because it literally, every time I'd go and do the check to cross-reference to see if it made sense, it was almost dead on. So it was just ridiculous from that standpoint. So welcome to the world of AI. I think insurance is probably going to go that route on all these big corporate centers with the call centers that you kind of drive by and you look at. I think they're going to be gone. I think you're going to end up having an AI bot basically service you, which in my mind, because I've had some good AI bots, I guess it's luck of the draw, I guess whoever sets it up. So there are some companies out there that I would actually say, yeah, thumbs up, good on that AI bot. It was 100% better than what you ever had, right? So great. And then there's the insurance company I'm dealing with. It's like, oh my God, please, if you're running an insurance company in Southern Ontario, sit down with your management, middle management, and talk about customer care and customer concerns. And I know AI is an important feature in your background as far as a tool, but it's a tool, nothing more than that, right? So if you're relying on it to provide you with customer service or to keep your staff qualified and current, you're going to run into problems. And I think you're going to run into regulatory problems probably shortly. Your rates have moved up. I noticed it, and I'm an idiot, just so you're aware of it, which means that at some point it's going to be an election issue where they're going to say, well, why don't we regulate the living daylights out of this, like Alberta, which apparently is a bad word when you say it in Ontario. So Alberta is provincially run. I've spent time out there. They're provincially run insurance. Very logical, makes a lot of sense when you kind of sit back and go with it. Essentially, everybody's insured out there, which is, look those out. I got kind of an odd shaped head. So when you go out there, basically, if you have a driver's license, you're insured. Like, that's nice. Insurance is attached to not only the vehicle, but the driver. So you don't get these hit and run stuff. It's pretty straightforward. Rates are set. Claims are set as well, which there's probably a negative with that. Like if you got a major injury, you've kind of have to live with that to a certain degree, but at least it brings the rates to a level and they have to explain rate hikes. Whereas in Ontario, they don't have to do that. So I think it should be an election issue. Rob Ford's coming up for one. Maybe someone will counter and say, hey, I don't care what they do down in the States. I don't. Markets will level itself out. That's just the nature of it, right? We're probably coming up to a changeover in just about every industry, period. I think there's going to be a changeover in the way governments are run. I think it's probably 5 years. It's going to be a rapid change for everybody. It's like an industrial revolution all over again. And I'm in an industry that works with automation and robotics. So I can see that on a day-to-day basis where you're losing that footprint of employment because it's shrinking, because less staff is required, because the automated systems are reducing that. So it's one of those things where everything's going to change. That's just what's happening, right? So you can't get around that. But with that said, that's my rant about insurance. I try to keep these things around 30 minutes. I always go to 45, just a ramble. So that's what I'm up to. It's been brutally cold here in Southern Ontario. Kind of the norm, kind of gives me a flashback to, hey, here's winter. But it's been minus 23 at night. So it's one of those things you look at. It's just, it just sucks that I got to go wash a car at minus 23 to get somebody in a Turo vehicle in January when the rates are so low. Whereas in the summertime, when it's beautiful and lovely out there, where I don't mind washing a car, giving a good vacuum and a tidy up, I almost find it enjoyable. And the rates are at 75 or $100. All right. So it's kind of like, got to do a ton of work in the cold weather, low pay. You got to do a ton of work in the summertime, beautiful outside. It's nice. Enjoy it. Do a little work on the driveway. Fun. So it's just one of those little, it sucks to be January moments. So seasonally, you get into that little seasonal depression too, because now you've got less sunlight and you don't really want to go anywhere because it's minus 23 outside. It's horrible. Now it's warmed up today. It's minus 4. So again, yay, winter. So, but again, it's just quirks, right? So bookkeeper, I had a gentleman talk to me, send me a chat on that one. Want to know what happened there. So I've chosen an independent, kind of a walk-in local bookkeeper / accountant. Haven't had any real follow-up from them, which I find surprising. But today, right? So customer service. So there was no real follow-up. I had a sit-down meeting with her where I basically agreed and said, okay, well, I'm going to bring in my paperwork and documentation, and we're probably going to look at it at tax season and go from there, right? So essentially, I'm doing my self-bookkeeping, which is going to be a nightmare because I'm not illiterate when it comes to that, but pretty close. So it's one of those things where I look at it, I'm doing a basic little blue book. I'm entering in some receipts. I'm keeping track of kilometers, things along that line. I'm relying on Turo's automated system for collecting taxes and for doing the T4, a version of a T4, essentially at the end of the season. So it's not that tough. I'm employed through a regular employer. So again, not rocket science as far as that's concerned. So it should be pretty straightforward. I didn't go with H&R Block because they didn't respond. So shame on you, H&R Block. I did that through your call-in center, email, and through your general inquiry through your website. So I don't know what your problem is. You actually have an H&R Block in town. That's sad as far as that's concerned. So if they pay for a franchise and they have to pay you for franchise fees, I'd be livid. So if you are an H&R holder and you run an office, you might want to look into that, because that's just, you didn't even give a chance to bunt me as a customer. Like, and I'm pretty much a lay down. Like, I'm going to go, okay, well, that's the rate for doing that. That's the cost for doing that. It is what it is. Just get her done. Right? Which is exactly the attitude I had when I went to the little independent. I said, look, as long as we're not crazy, price point wise, and it's competitive, and I can check with my personal assistant AI, because I do that. And the AI comes back and says, yeah, that's normal. Like, these are the rates that were kind of in the industry, that's standard. And it's a year out. So in other words, I factor for a little bit of overage. And I had another guy that basically, he seemed pretty legitimate. Like, he seemed very knowledgeable. The dilemma was that I couldn't get an appointment for him. He wanted to charge for the initial consultation, which I thought, okay, well, maybe I get it later. Like, it's one of those things where you can, that's not really an exciting way to start a relationship with a client. Say, yeah, no problem. I'm going to bill you like $80. So come on in. Whereas the other one said, well, come on in. We'll sit down for 15 minutes. We'll talk. We'll even see if we're on the same page, right? Which made sense. And she could have just shook her hand and said, no, I don't want to deal with you. And I would have been fine with that, right? But the other one was kind of like, it's this. And they sent me a listing of quotes, which I thought, I actually like that. It's one of those things where, okay, I get an idea if I didn't know what the budget was. And then I run the numbers through AI, and it's like, well, they're on the upper high end of pricing. So without being able to validate who you are, in other words, by not actually giving me the opportunity to essentially interview you, like, that's really what it is. Like, that first meeting is really an interview from me as the consumer to you, as whether or not I want to hire you. That's the way it is. So if you don't want to really do that without there being a cost attached to it, it kind of tells me that, okay, well, you're probably not going to go that little extra mile without there being a bill attached to it. And if I were running a larger franchise store, I didn't want any headaches, and I said, okay, the budget is this for it, I would probably go to that guy, because it's like, that is what it is, like, yeah, right. And been doing it for years, pay a premium. But when I'm in that little tiny little area, like the little guy, I have to go to the little guy. Like, that's just the nature of it. So that's where I'm at with that. Rates in Ontario, I think it basically boils down to like $75 an hour for an account. So if they're under or within that range, and she was under in a couple spots, it was like, no, if it's a basic little thing, it's 45. Okay, so she's flexible on things like that. I thought, okay, that's cool. We'll let her run with it. I thought it was a little weird, because I asked, well, what's the software that I should be using, and a few other little things, and she didn't get back to me. So it's one of those things where I thought, okay, well, at least you'd ping me back and say, thanks for the meeting. I appreciate the opportunity. Here's a couple links. Please go buy this software. and please give me the access code so I can review it once a month. I even told her that. So I would be happy if you went ahead and billed me an hour time and look over my books on a monthly. I'll do the basic inputting, but great. You can give me a month-to-month report on, where my costs are and where things are going. Perfect, right? Didn't get back to me with that one. So I thought that was a little strange. But again, AI, the wonderful world of automated technology, I can get that done on the internet all by myself. So, but at the same time, it is nice to have that personal conversation, right? To be able to say, hey, is this accurate or is this not accurate, or where are we going with it? Again, my numbers are so small. I don't want to get behind the 8 ball on something where I have to go back and say, hey, I made a mistake, 2 or 3 years down the road. I don't know where this is going to go, but essentially this is a trial and we're coming to the 6 months point. After that inspection, we'll see whether or not we're going to continue with Turo. We'll go from there. So again, we are at 40. So we're getting close where I've tried to shoot for 30, but then I get ranting. So I do apologize for that. We're going to go ahead and say goodbye. Again, check out my other stuff. I do apologize for the video quality. Again, I'm using a really, really cheap setup. I'm using essentially a PlayStation 3 camera. Beg, borrow, steal from whatever I've got, right? So, and I have a lovely Blue Yeti mic. And the idea is that, again, I do want to do a podcast series because I think this content actually lends more to a podcast than it does a video presentation in this type of, conversation. So that's kind of the end goal, is to be able to say, after I've done 6 months or a year at Turo, I'm going to put out a bundle of podcasts. I'm thinking probably 12 and be like, these are the 12, topics or 12 chapters that you should probably review or go through before starting Turo. And then I'd like to continue that podcast, if I continue with Turo, as kind of like, this is the day-to-day after the first year. You've already established, your basics and your entries, and then go from there, right? So that's kind of the intent. So you're really getting a raw overview of what I'm doing and kind of a building up to something else. So my apologies for that, but at least you can say, hey, there he is. But my thought would be is you're probably putting around the house, or you're in your own little office, or you're doing your things. You're not really watching me wave my hands and talk. You're kind of just doing it in the background. With that said, I would greatly appreciate it. This is where we do the PBS moment. If you could subscribe, that would be great. I think I'm at 285, which is mind-boggling, considering I've been doing this for 5 months. So I'm happy with that. Like, I'm not saying, oh my God, I haven't had 1 million views. This is a really narrow line of topics, right? It's really small. Even when you look at Turo, as far as the amount of vehicles that are out there, it's a small group. So it's a tiny little niche. But if you're in that, and I would really appreciate it if you subscribe. And if you're actually doing little videos, or you've got some Turo information, you can say, hey, Keith, I went through this. I'm in the GT. I've been running it for 4 years. I use it for doing this particular vehicle, and this is my results. And yes, you're absolutely right. It's a pain in the butt, but you have to do it, right? I would greatly appreciate that type of response. If you can do a thumbs up, that would be wonderful too. And if you can leave a comment, I would like that. Again, I try to respond to everything. Nice thing is that with only 285 subscriptions, it leaves me with a lot of time to be able to respond. So just so you're aware of it. So you almost get the easy access from that standpoint. So again, subscriptions would be great. I'm looking for some content providers as well. So I'm trying to trying to find in my neck of the woods, it's a harder thing to come across, but I'd like to find a private finance company or a private leasing company to talk about Turo with. Not necessarily because I want to lease or purchase a car through you, because I think your rates are probably competitive for the market you're in, but I think they're a little bit higher. But it'd be nice to be able to sit back and talk to you about, hey, from your point of view as a lender or as a private lease, what has been your experience with peer-to-peer car rentals? I would like to do a little 15 minutes or 20-minute conversation with that. That would be great. We could either do it by a phone, or we could take my phone down to your office and have a little conversation, that type of deal. It would be a two-way street. So one of those things where I get information. If you're a legitimate company and you're ONVEC registered, and you're not like in the back of a pool hall going, yeah, we loan money to guys that want cars. I'm not looking for that guy, right? So I'm looking for an actual leasing company. So if you're If you're above board and you got everything all in order and you're kind of going, Keith, this has been an item of content for us, and we would like to be able to settle a couple issues and say, don't do Turo if you're renting our cars, or don't do Turo if you're leasing it, or don't do Turo if you're doing that, or for God's sakes, tell us so we can make sure the insurance is properly covered. And I think if you're, at least from what I've been reading, if you are running a leasing company or you're running an independent finance company, I think the real hurdle isn't necessarily whether or not they can do the car on Turo. I think the real issue is the liabilities attached to it. In other words, if that car goes out, you as a leasing company did the safety and did the due diligence on it to make sure the vehicle was proper for the road, and something failed from that standpoint, I think you get hit double duty on liable issues. I think it's one of those things where not just the person you either lease the vehicle to, but the person that's done the sublease, I think has the option of suing you. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's where one of the hurdles in the business is, where you kind of go, I don't want that headache or the liability having to deal with a third party or a second person in the mix. So maybe that's where the problem is. Or maybe the issue is that you just don't cater to that market, which is fine. I'd just like to get a response to that. That'd be great. The other one, I've been hunting down a couple of new car dealers where I'd want to talk about things like what's the best way to get into a vehicle on the new end for Turo in your inventory. So in other words, if you've got a car that's been sitting 90 days or 180 days in inventory, and there's a manufacturer's rebate, and you're prepared to basically slash prices because you're crazy, right? And you're OMVAC registered, again, if you're a legitimate dealer. And if you'd like to have a conversation about that, maybe say, you know what, we have our ongoing rental cars where you have a service vehicle that you rotate out of, and maybe that's a source for a Turo vehicle. I'd love to have a conversation with you from that standpoint and say, oh, does new cars work? And I would literally sit here and go, okay, well, let's work out a price on what you can provide me, and then let's work out what the rental would be, and then what would be the occupancy rate of that particular vehicle based on Turo stats. And then we could figure out, well, does this make any sense from a profit standpoint? Can I keep that car out for 20 days, cover the insurance, and that'd be a full insurance package? And do I make a little bit of money on the end of it and cover the payment and depreciation? That'd be an interesting conversation. So if you are out there and you want to have that type of communication, I would appreciate it. Again, if you've held on for 47 minutes listening to me drone on, you've either fallen asleep because it's a form of white noise. So like, shh, great. If not, you're really into Turo, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant and enjoyable day. And hit that little button and stream, and see ya. End.